we're living in an era in which the idea of truth, objective truth, has been to a very large extent replaced by ideology. Well, if there's no such thing as truth, then there's no such thing as lies.
Anti-genocide!
Anti-Israel!
Anti-baby killing!
Anti-Israel!
Intifada! 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 Intifada!
To me, 15 years ago, anti-Semitism was a horrible part of history, but not about the United States that I knew and that I lived in. By around 2001, 2002, 2003, I was fighting discrimination against blacks, against Hispanics, against women, against the disabled, but I found around that time that there was a spike in anti-Semitism, not just in the Middle East, not just in Europe, but also on American college campuses.
You can't cohabitate a university campus with these people because they aren't there to coexist with you. They're there to destroy you.
Long live the Intifada!
Intifada! Intifada!
Intifada! Intifada!
They have no tolerance to hear another point of view, and instead they're engaging in name-calling, calling Jews on campus who disagree with them Nazis, oppressors, the chosen people who have not learned their lessons from the Holocaust.
Any support of Israel is hate speech.
I have to question to what extent do we allow these student organizations to do what they do and get away with it because we don't want to show bias.
Universities in America were founded as schools of theology, mostly for white Protestant men. It took decades and the civil rights movement for colleges to accept all Americans. By the beginning of the 21st century, it seemed like colleges provided a welcoming environment, not just for Americans, but also for many students from around the globe. But a survey of American colleges shows a disturbing, troubling trend. There is still one group that's being singled out for hostility. Many Jewish students who grew up with the idealistic expectations of equality, diversity, inclusion, and a nurturing learning environment are shocked to discover a harsh and ugly reality on many campuses, which is mostly ignored by college officials.
Imagine what you would do if you were approached by someone who simply said that the Holocaust never happened. What if they denied to your face that 6 million Jews were killed? What if they praised a Nazi and called him one of their heroes? Don't think it could happen? It happened right here at this institution last November on a day that was called Diversity Day.
Today on American college campuses, there's only one group of students that you're allowed to attack, and you can attack at will, and those are Jews.
This documentary examines the radical transformation of the relationship between American universities and their Jewish students, especially those who support Israel.
The truth of the matter is, your days are numbered.
This transformation is part of a larger change within academia, which has embraced extremist ideologies that often include aggressive social activism, indoctrination, and coerced conformity. A UCLA student applying for a position on a student judicial board was initially turned down for the position after being questioned by the Student Association Council, not about her qualifications, but whether she could fairly represent the student body because she was involved with Jewish organizations.
Let me read it. Given that you're a Jewish student and very active in the Jewish community, how do you see yourself being able to maintain an unbiased view. This is not in Germany in 1936. I'm dead serious. This is in Los Angeles in 2015. Why don't they just tell her that she has to wear a patch when she walks around campus? A Star of David.
I feel like you're reading about a different country.
At Stanford University, Molly Horowitz, who was running for a seat on the Student Senate, faced questions about whether her Jewish faith and strong Jewish identity would affect her ability to serve effectively on the Senate. The attacks on Rachel Beda and Molly Horowitz are part of a larger trend of rising anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activities on American college campuses. The problem is that the anti-Israel culture, in which we are singling out only the Jewish state, creates an environment where it's okay to single out Jewish students.
Very frequently, we find that students come to us with incidents in which they believe that they've been harassed or subjected to a hostile environment.
We support the Intifada!
We support the Intifada!
And the group that they frequently mention is Students for Justice in Palestine.
Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP, is a rapidly growing national organization with more than 200 chapters at American universities.
Anti-Zionism!
Anti-Israel!
The hostility to Jewish students is most severe on the University of California campuses.
Hey, hey! Oh, oh! The state of Israel got to go! Hey, hey! Oh, oh!
Holocaust happening in the Holy Land. There's a genocide happening in the Holy Land, and it will be fought, and it is being fought. They say that it's anti-Semitic. If you say that the Zionists control the media, you better get out of here. Old Rupert's a straight-up Zionist Jew. He is. The truth of the matter is, your days are numbered.
In 2010, a Jewish student at UC Berkeley was attacked on campus.
She was attending a pro-Israel rally. She wasn't speaking, she wasn't shouting, she was holding a sign that said, "Israel wants peace." And a leader of the SJP came around behind her with a shopping cart filled with materials, and he rammed her from behind with the shopping cart, causing her to fall to the ground, and she required medical attention.
Intifada! 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 Long live the Intifada!
Long live the Intifada!
Long live the Intifada!
At Vassar College, SJP members harassed students and faculty planning an educational trip to Israel.
They picketed outside. They forced the professor and the students to cross the picket line. It was a really horrible situation. The students in the class were traumatized.
The Vassar administration held a campus-wide forum in response to this incident.
When pro-Israel students spoke up, trying to defend Israel, they were essentially shouted down. They could not believe what had happened. You had hundreds of people packing in an auditorium or large classroom who were just profanely anti-Israel and mocking of any Jewish student who stood up to defend Israel.
Some days in class, I would not wear my Jewish star necklace because it was easier to not be identified as a Jewish student.
Free Palestine! No justice, no peace!
In 2013, SJP interrupted a Holocaust commemoration, shouting, "The lessons of the Holocaust were not learned. You are child murderers." In February 2014, SJP members slipped some 600 mock eviction notices under dorm room doors of Northeastern students. After the mock eviction notices incident, Northeastern University President Joseph Aoun suspended SJP for multiple violations of school policies.
We have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, zero tolerance for racism or any kind of hatred.
SJP used its Twitter feed to share a violent fantasy of assaulting President Aoun. On April 10th, SJP tweeted, wherein we jump up and down on the thorax of President Aoun following his outrageous SJP statement and failed leadership. The Boston media reacted sympathetically to SJP's hateful behavior, accepting SJP's framing of the suspension as a free speech issue, while ignoring harassment of Jewish students. The Boston Globe reporting was supportive of SJP. The newspaper also turned over its editorial page to SJP leader Max Geller. After weeks of media coverage, protests, and threat of legal actions, Northeastern University ended SJP's suspension. SJP members at Florida Atlantic University and NYU also posted mock eviction notices on dormitory doors.
So this flyer highlights what SJP is all about, which is spreading lies about the Jewish state and about the Jewish people.
In August 2014 at Temple University, a pro-Israel student was punched in the face at an SJP promotional event. Another Temple University student noted on her Facebook page, "I'm tired of having to walk through anti-Semitic rallies occurring in the middle of campus. I'm tired of seeing the nail marks on my door from where the mezuzah was forcibly ripped from the wall. I'm tired of anti-Semitism being a completely normal occurrence and people standing idly by, because as long as they're only going after Jews, nobody cares." Students for Justice in Palestine is allied with a web of organizations connected to the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. The Muslim Brotherhood, one of the most influential Islamist movements, was founded in Egypt in 1928 with the goal of unifying the Muslim world under a single Islamic state. The terrorist organizations Al-Qaeda and Hamas were founded by Muslim Brotherhood members. The Brotherhood, with Saudi financial support, has built a complex Islamist infrastructure in America. The Muslim Student Association, or MSA, was the first Muslim Brotherhood front group established in the United States. Today, it has over 600 campus chapters in North America. A 2007 New York Police Department report on terrorism identified the MSA as an incubator for Islamic radicalism. Over a dozen MSA leaders and members on U.S. campuses have participated in terrorist activities. These include Anwar al-Awlaki from Colorado State University, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, killed in a U.S. drone attack. Ramzi Youssef from Rutgers University was imprisoned for masterminding the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. Afia Siddiqui from MIT was sentenced to 86 years in prison for attempted murder of FBI agents in Afghanistan. And Johar Tsarnaev from the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth was sentenced to death for the 2013 bombing of the Boston Marathon. The growth of SJP activism reflects the increasing number of students from Arab and Muslim countries in U.S. colleges. Most of these students come to America seeking a better life and the superior education offered by American universities.
Life in Bangladesh was getting very tough, and we had to move to the United States so that way we can survive. Being raised as a Muslim, I was taught by my imams or my Islamic tutors to
to support Palestine as they were a group of people who were oppressed by the Israeli government. There's definitely a lot of ethnic solidarity between Muslims and Palestinians because majority of the Palestinians are Muslims. So it's almost like a brotherhood.
Many of the Muslim students come from countries that are steeped in anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist rhetoric. They are a prime target for radicalization. On campuses today, there are multiple programs to counter discrimination and potential hostility toward many different groups on campus. There is no known sensitivity training about Jews or Judaism, especially for foreign students. Students for Justice in Palestine was co-founded in the early 1990s by Hatem Bazian, a Palestinian immigrant and a former member of the Muslim Student Association.
Are you angry? Are you angry? Are you angry? Well, we've been watching Intifada in Palestine. We've been watching an uprising in Iraq. And the question is that what are we doing? How come we don't have an Intifada in this country?
Today, Hatem Bazian holds leadership positions in several prominent Muslim organizations. He is the founder and national chair of American Muslims for Palestine, AMP.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I worked as a terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Treasury from 2004 to 2007. AMP is arguably the leading BDS organization in the U.S. It is a key sponsor of the anti-Israel campus network known as Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP. AMP provides money, speakers, training, printed materials, and so-called apartheid walls to SJP activists. AMP even has a campus coordinator who orchestrates the BDS activities of SJP and other campus groups nationwide.
AMP defends terrorist attacks on Israel as legitimate resistance and accuses some American Jews of murdering Palestinians.
When I look at the people who fight with the Israeli occupation forces, that American people who fight with the Israeli occupation forces, I mean, we don't know, I don't think we understand how many American Jews who were involved in the assault on Gaza the past summer were American. Of those people massacring those 500 children and those civilians, there were American Jews.
AMP is also planning to expand its anti-Israel activities into U.S. high schools.
AMP will set itself apart from all other organizations working in the movement because we are the only institution working for Palestine from the Islamic perspective. That's why AMP is contracting with curriculum development experts to create a Palestine curriculum according to U.S. pedagogical guidelines that will fit seamlessly into high school social studies or history lesson plans.
SJP has successfully grafted the Palestinian cause to the radical social justice movement. By manipulating identity politics, SJP and its supporters successfully created an anti-Israel alliance of extremist campus groups.
One of the strangest alliances on university campuses today is between the hard left, which includes some hard left feminists, hard left gay rights activists, hard left African American activists, and Islamicists on campus.
Historically, we have been Zionists. We've been Zionists, from socialists to liberals to conservatives. Whether you're talking about W.E.B. Du Bois, who said that he wanted what Zionism was for Jews, he wanted that for Africans. And of course, you've had leaders such as Dr. King, Rosa Parks, Bayard Rustin. Many famous people throughout Black history have been Zionists and notable Zionists. The NAACP in 1948 affirmed that the creation of the State of Israel was a symbol for all oppressed minorities everywhere.
Some idealistic and well-intentioned students have also joined SJP.
What drew me to SJP was my motivation to support equal human rights. I joined them because I felt that the Palestinian people were being oppressed.
I used to side with SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, because they catered more towards minority groups on campus, which I identify with. I'm I identify as gay and I identify with the Asian Pacific Student Union. All of them support SJP in the name of social justice and equality.
That language attracts college students who feel as though they are making an impact, that they themselves are helping to change the world. What you really see is a lot of moral narcissism. They're not there to better the lives of Palestinian Arabs. They want to feel like they're important.
Moral narcissists are cloaking their narcissism in the trappings of social justice positioning.
SJP deliberately works with anti-Zionist Jewish organizations because working with those organizations helps to immunize them against charges of bigotry and anti-Semitism. It gives SJP cover.
These students are using what amounts to the accident of their Jewishness to give themselves a moral standing and a moral legitimacy.
A lot of the participants don't understand the history of the movement. They don't understand who is running the movement. There is some visceral hatred of Israel, which seems to permeate some progressive groups, where the ideology has become that to be anti-Israel is to be truly progressive.
Proponents of intersectionality see a world of all-encompassing oppression. All injustices are interconnected. Intersectionality allows any victim group to make common cause with the Palestinians.
It's post-imperialist or post-colonialist thought that feeds a whole dimension of the critique of Israel. A lot of intellectuals are playing out this sort of colonial guilt thing and using Israel as their sacrificial lamb by sacrificing Israel to what is in fact the most ferocious imperialist colonialist force. Islam is a colonialist imperialist enterprise. The Israelis are now being told, you have to make concessions as a way of achieving some kind of absolution for the West's sins against the world.
You'll never see on campus a protest or a conference addressing the status of LGBT people in the Arab world.
When you see homosexual rights organizations, women's rights organizations, people who are so-called feminists, standing shoulder to shoulder with Islamists, with people who support radical Islam, I think that what you're seeing really is the pathology of anti-Westernism.
The progressives are not at all concerned about the fate of black slaves who are enslaved currently by the Arab and Muslim world. They ignore the plight of women in the Arab and Muslim world. They don't care about the oppressed.
You will never hear protests about how Hamas treats people in Gaza. You won't hear about the brutal repression of Palestinians by the Palestinian Authority. There is never a concern expressed by these groups on campus about Palestinians unless it can be used against Israel.
Prejudice and bigotry are all about lies. Anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, is based on a set of deranged lies and libels about the Jewish people.
SJP and the BDS movement are benefiting from the radical leftist ideology currently dominant in the universities.
Too many faculty members are trying to propagandize their students to their hard left attitudes, many of which are reflective of hatred toward America, hatred toward Israel.
intimidation and harassment of Jewish students by professors was documented over a decade ago.
Columbia University, Ivy League education, world-class professors, and now charges of academic intimidation.
Professors are abusing their power as professors to push their views on students and harass them to stop them from airing their opinions.
And he looked right into my eyes and he said, "See, you have green eyes." He said, "You're not a Semite." He said, "I'm a Semite. I have brown eyes." He said, "You have no claim to the land of Israel."
Basically, I raised my hand and said, "Hello, my name is Tommy, I'm Israeli, and I would like to ask you some questions." And before I could continue, he stopped me and said, "Oh, are you Israeli? You served in the IDF?" I said, "Yes." So his next question was, "How many Palestinians have you killed?"
At Northeastern University, a student felt bullied by a professor when she questioned his praise for Hamas in class.
I just felt very ostracized in the class by the professor. I cited reasons as indisputable as the US considers them a terrorist organization. He wanted me to rewrite my paper because he did not see how I could logically have come to that conclusion. I am still entitled to that opinion, and he shouldn't have to force his views upon me.
We just want honesty. We want to feel comfortable expressing views in the classroom that might not be the views that the professors themselves hold. We just want to make a safe and good educational environment.
Free speech is sacrosanct until it causes offense, whereupon it is banned as hate speech. Only some groups, it seems, are capable of being offended.
What the battle nowadays is about on campuses, it's not giving pro-Israel students any special rights. It's simply treating them with the same protections for their speech that are afforded to anti-Israel groups.
How better to empower those who want to kill Jews in Israel than to deny their supporters in the United States of any sort of legitimacy or right to freedom of speech.
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
We want to talk about the fact that the Center for Israeli Studies exists on our campus. We don't want to listen.
Long live the Intifada!
Long live the Intifada!
We don't want two states! We want 48! We don't want two states! We want...
In November 2012, students occupied Dutton Hall at the University of California in Davis. They were protesting in solidarity with Gaza. Protest leaders advocated a selective approach toward free speech.
You're always asked if you're going to have a pro-Palestinian speaker, you have to have a pro-Israeli speaker there to give us the other side. Or nobody asks you, what's the other side to Hitler?
Leave our space! Leave our space!
Leave our space!
Leave our space! Leave our space! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
I have not said a word. I have come here. I have listened. Why would I?
Any support of Israel is hate speech.
Events like these are not welcome on our campus anymore.
My only purpose today is that this event is shut down.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
SJP rhetoric towards students who don't agree with them is that if you don't agree with them, you're against them, so they have to shut you down.
Let's never forget that it was the students who burned the books in the German universities in the 1930s. It was the students who beat up the Jewish professors and the Jewish students. It was the students who were most deeply involved in the Nazi takeover of academia.
There have been many efforts by SJP and its allies to silence and disrupt events that question their one-sided Palestinian narrative.
North Gaza, killed by Israeli forces. Murdered!
What's interesting when it comes to the freedom of speech is when it's invoked and when it isn't
invoked. When other groups are involved, people will often say this is a question of harassment, but when Jewish or Israeli students are involved, they'll raise the First Amendment.
At Yale University, the administration suspended a fraternity for 5 years for sexist chants on campus. Yale said the discipline was necessary to ensure an educational environment free from harassment and intimidation.
There is an incredible double standard on college campuses. If you say anything critical of Islam or Islamic extremists, you're subject to being considered a bigot, violating university rules, but you can say anything you want about the nation state of the Jewish people.
In a politicized school environment, certain groups are protected while others are targeted. Despite the increasing hate, violence, and hostility against Jewish students on U.S. campuses, college administrators don't seem concerned about microaggressions, trigger warnings, and safe spaces when Jews are the victims. On university campuses, victims are using their status, their power, to silence the expression of differing views.
If you're part of the oppressor group, then obviously your victim has the moral right to do to you whatever he deems fit, because as a victim, he essentially cannot be judged.
I always imagined college to be that one space that you are allowed to grow and thrive in academia and activism. So when we all, were working towards what we stood for and then we're being isolated for it, it was very shocking because that was, the complete opposite of what I imagined a university campus would be like.
In pursuit of an agenda to demonize Israel and divide the Jewish community, SJP members, with faculty support, launched a boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign against Israel.
There are academic associations where you can attend BDS sessions all day long. Your entire experience for a couple of days is listening to rallies against Israel that pretend to be academic presentations.
The goal of BDS is to miseducate students, to perpetrate a series of lies. It tells students that its goal is to end the occupation. Its goal is to create a new occupation. It wants the Jewish people of Israel to be occupied essentially by a majority of Palestinians, and that's the goal. Yet they hide that, and they're very deceptive about it.
Boycotts targeting Jews have a long and ugly history. Singling out Israel for international sanctions out of all proportion to any other party in the Middle East is anti-Semitic, and not saying so is dishonest.
Israel is singled out in another way, which is unique. And it corresponds to the unique way in which the Jewish people has always been singled out for double standards. not just a double standard, but an impossible standard, a standard of perfection which cannot possibly be reached.
On January 29th, 2015, the Student Senate at the University of California, Davis passed an SJP-sponsored resolution calling for the university to divest from companies doing business with the Jewish state. The vote reflected aggressive activism by pro-SJP students. Most of the yes votes were cast by radicalized students. Aska Fayyaz and Anabia Saeed are members of the Muslim Student Association. SJP supporters celebrated the results of the vote by taunting the Jewish students. Aska Fayyaz, one of the senators who voted in favor of divestment, celebrated on her Facebook page by posting a picture with the caption, "Hamas and Sharia law have taken over UC Davis." 2 days after the passage of the resolution, the Jewish fraternity Alpha Epsilon Pi at UC Davis was desecrated with swastikas.
It makes me feel, it shook me up this morning, definitely makes me feel a little bit marginalized on campus. This whole week has kind of been not a great week to be a Jewish student on campus.
During BDS, I actually avoid Hillel, the Quad, and even my sorority because I really don't want to have to deal with how unsafe campus feels. The university mission used to emphasize the search for truth. The radicalization of the campus in the 1960s fundamentally altered students' beliefs about moral behavior and created a new theology in the humanities that favors identity narratives over objective truths.
I believe that we're living in an era in which the idea of truth, objective truth, has been to a very large extent replaced by ideology. Well, if there's no such thing as truth, then there's no such thing as lies, and consequently we're living in an era where people can no longer distinguish between truth and lies.
We should recognize that the policies of Hamas are more forthcoming and more conducive to a peaceful settlement than those of the United States or Israel.
It's very difficult to deal with a blizzard of lies. Because you can always invent some kind of fiction, and then that requires enormous efforts to essentially, prove the negative. That in fact did not happen.
Once you believe that the only democracy in the Middle East, the only human rights respecting government in the Middle East, the only place where Muslim women are given the rights and the full protection of law is the worst oppressor, then you can believe anything.
There is no subject today in the world which has more distortion, more lies, more dissembling than discussions about Israel.
Because there's no such thing as truth, what's come in is kind of power. I'm going to show that my view of the world is going to win over your view of the world. So it becomes a contest of power groups. And all these ideologies are power groupings.
Reason is a hoax, and thus there is no truth, but only power, and no reality but the one we construct. False narratives and hateful propaganda have had negative consequences, especially for Jewish students.
The more that people attach themselves to ideologies that reject reason, that reject objective reality, that reject facts, that reject history, the more likely you're going to see very aggressive anti-Semitism.
As someone who isn't politically involved, that's what you see, is a lot of Israel bashing, a lot of attacks on Jewish students.
Find out what any people will quietly submit to. and you have the exact measure of the injustice and wrong which will be imposed on them.
Jews who are openly being attacked, assaulted, intimidated, and otherwise aggressed against on a daily basis on college campuses are finding themselves facing administrators who say we can't figure out what anti-Judaism is, what anti-Jewish behavior is, what bigotry against Jews is.
The ideological assault on Israel on campus was initiated by radical faculty and student activists. It later grew with the influx of professors and students from Muslim countries. Today, Students for Justice in Palestine and its radical allies are spearheading the harassment and intimidation of pro-Israel students on campus. This hostility is reinforced, influenced, and financed by outside organizations and often whitewashed by a sympathetic, politically correct media. University officials generally give SJP and its allies a free pass from university rules and policies.
You have to recognize that the university is enabling them. The administrations are enabling them. The administrations are also subsidizing their operations and giving them legitimacy as if they're just another student club.
Many university officials are uncomfortable dealing with hatred that comes from a non-Western minority, preferring to selectively invoke the concepts of academic freedom and free speech instead of fulfilling their responsibility to Jewish students. At UC Davis, Julia Rifkin, the president of Aggies for Israel, led a walkout of those who opposed a BDS resolution.
Than the well-being of students. You have divided our campus and you have damaged lives. And we need not legitimize the words spoken in this empty hearing. I invite you now to stand up, really stand up, and join me in walking out of this room. Woo!
Some Muslim students recognize the importance of seeking peace.
I helped bring the Israeli apartheid wall to my campus at University of Central Florida for the first time in years. And while I was at the mock apartheid wall, I met an IDF soldier for the first time in my life. I realized that we both want peace, but we have a different way of going about it. And that was a very defining moment in my life. And it is time for pro-Israeli Muslims such as myself to speak out, because if we don't speak out, we will perhaps never see peace in our lifetime. You can be pro-Israeli, but at the same time be pro-Palestinian as well.
Hostility to Jews on campus, which was based on overt discrimination prior to the 1950s, has now been replaced by an aggressive and sometimes violent hatred against Jewish students, often led by Students for Justice in Palestine. SJP campaigns offer those who hate Jews, Israel, capitalism, and America a venue and a cause that incite hostility against Jews on campus.
Their whole way of being on campus is creating a hostile environment for Jewish students, an environment where Jewish students are afraid to speak up. That's not what a college experience is supposed to be about.